Hello, this is Father David Nix. It's been a while since I put anything up on the life update section of my website, and I've never done a little video, so I think I'm just going to embed this into Rumble. Not a lot of subscribers on Rumble, but I'm going to put this on Rumble and then embed it in the life update. So if you're opening up the life update, this is called A Day in the Life of. Now, as you may have seen on my website and other places, I did talk about how, as a hermit, I do have an approved rule of life that includes, my diocese came up with it, 20 days of contemplative life, 10 days of active. Hopefully it comes to something like that. But, when those who are opposed to me say, you're a bad hermit for traveling, a hermit is just someone who lives alone. So yes, I am a diocesan priest, become a diocesan hermit. But when I meet people, sometimes it's better just to explain myself as a monk missionary. And I think that is why my donors support me, is because of primarily actually the life of prayer and education that I'm hopefully giving some people. But also in the travels, there can be very interesting evangelization encounters. And so I'm calling today's blog post, and I suppose video probably also, A Day in the Life of, just to kind of show you when I'm not in my little condo, my little hermitage. And thanks to you who are donating for me to build a real hermitage. I know I keep talking about that, but there's a lot of factors, and the main thing I'm saving up, or really my charity is saving up for, is to actually move me into a place where we're going to build a real chapel. I do have a table, of course, for the traditional Latin Mass that I've turned into an altar, but I need a full chapel. Anyway, one of the interesting things that happens, I think, probably to any priest, but I think especially one that has a mission to evangelize, you're going to face some spiritual attack. And so when I started at Denver International Airport a couple days ago, and by the way, you can probably see a hotel room in the back here. I'm actually on my way to do some Catholic film things in Florida, but I stopped in Texas. And in Denver International Airport, I can sometimes tell when there's going to be, maybe not big fish fall into my boat, but God's going to bless me with cooperating with the salvation of souls when there's spiritual attack. And it's sometimes coming to the point it's so silly, I just try to stay patient and smile. Now, maybe I'm just paying for past sins. Reparation is paying for your own sins, expiation for other sins. I don't know what it is. So I'm not claiming to be some Padre Pio when I tell this story. And by the way, on this little video, I'm going to explain three things. One, spiritual attack in Denver airport, landing in an airport in Texas, an interesting interaction I had with somebody that I think you might find fascinating. And then three, talking to Bishop Graca. So that's just a little overview of what a day in the life of Father David Nix, monk missionary, might look like. And if you've made it this far, thanks, because it gets a little bit better. This was a slow start because it's early here in the hotel. But, so at Denver International Airport a couple days ago, my bag came through, and they have this glass system and security, this kind of advanced conveyor belt glass system, and my bag got selected, as it often does. Now, maybe that's because of the mask kit. Now, maybe that's because sometimes there's wine for mask. Of course, it's not the precious blood yet. People see the chalice through the x-ray. I don't know. But it almost always gets picked. So it goes behind the glass where people are going to get picked, and then there is maybe, 2, 4, 6, 8 start piling up for the inspection. And there's an older lady to my left, and then to my right, there's more people piling up who now are going to have to get an inspection. This is, again, security at Denver International Airport. And the lady to my left, I'm not kidding, this is going to sound like I'm just exaggerating. She was an older white woman traveling with strawberry pancake mix, and TSA at Denver International Airport decided to pull out the explosives expert to test her strawberry pancake mix. Now, I'm not making this about me, because Denver International Airport is known to have an insane level of bad decisions that always happen there. But I did find it interesting that I was on a mission to help bring some people back to the church, meet a bishop who was a hero to me, that there were real specific missions on this trip. And so I kind of just stood there smiling. So TSA brought out the explosives expert to test her pancake mix. And at the same time, my bag on the conveyor belt, someone else's headphones got stuck in the conveyor belt. So I look over and there is one guy bomb testing pancake mix, and there's another TSA agent trying to yank out headphones out of the conveyor belt. And I just thought, this looks like the old bugger. This looks a little bit like how the demons work in my life. And so I just kind of smiled and offered it up for, maybe God has a good plan. Maybe I'm just paying for my past sins, but maybe God has a very good plan for this trip. And I think he did. So then I land a few hours later in an airport in Texas, and I went and I just got some fried rice before heading out to where it was a 3-hour drive after that. So I just needed a snack, got some fried rice. I guess this was actually technically lunch. So I sat down, ate some fried rice, and it was in a food court in this airport, and every table that I was at was basically a 2-person table, but the table next to you that's supposed to be occupied by strangers was only about a foot away. So if you can picture that, several 2-person tables, only like 3 feet by 2 feet. And so I'm eating some fried rice, and to my left, at this other small table, but only a foot away, this woman, maybe 35 years old, says to me, "Can I sit here?" I said, "Oh, sure." And I thought that was weird, since these are all public tables in a public airport in a food court. Why would she ask if she can sit next to me? And then I realized as I was eating, well, maybe she's afraid of this big purple habit. Maybe she doesn't know what a monk or a missionary or a hermit or a priest is. So I wanted to make her feel a little bit more at ease next to me. I usually don't start small talk with people next to me at the airport. But again, she was 1 foot from me. She was eating some pizza, and it said pink pizza, a local favorite, at the place that was right next to her, the food place. So I said to her, "Oh, it says a local favorite. Is it really a local favorite?" And she goes, "Oh, I don't know. I'm not from here." I said, "Oh, okay." And she said, I just got here. I've been just away for 13 years. I said, "Oh, what do you mean away?" And she goes, "The Fed. I was in the Fed." And I was 90% sure I knew what she meant by the Fed. So I said, "The Fed?" And she said, "Yeah, the federal penitentiary." I said, "Oh, when did you get out?" And she said, "Today." So she's eating a piece of pizza and tells me she's been in the federal penitentiary for 13 years. And so I said to her, "How is it being out? How's it been?" And she said, "Well, I threw up on the plane." And I said, "Is that just because your system didn't know how to handle freedom?" And she said, "No, it was the movement. My body just isn't used to all this movement after being in prison for 13 years. I said, "Okay, I think I get that." And then I decided to maybe not tease her a little bit, but just to, people who spend time in prison can usually handle very direct questions. So I said, "So is that why you asked if you could sit here, because you have been in prison?" And she thought about it a second. She goes, "I guess so." And normally you don't have to ask someone at an airport if they can sit next to you. So it had nothing to do with my religious habit, with my hermit habit. She just was used to asking people if she could sit there, especially if you're sitting next to a stranger, because you have to watch your back in prison. And so we had an interesting discussion at that point about freedom, what it's like to be out. You have to remember, with her being in prison for 13 years, she was in there, she started her prison sentence pre-COVID. So here she comes out into a world that is so different. I mean, imagine seeing the pre and post-COVID world. Besides the fact there's little things different, like people are now flying in pajamas. People go to the airport in pajamas now, and I don't think they were 13 years ago. So much of the world has changed since 2020 and 2021 and 2022. So then I did what I often do. I get out a miraculous medal with a chain on it that I've blessed with a little explanation, and I put it on her table. Again, this was just 1 foot away from my table, And I said, "Oh, I have a gift for you." And she didn't hear me say, "I have a gift for you." She just saw me put a silver necklace on her table, and she said, "Oh, that's really nice." And then she went back to eating her piece of pizza. And I said, "No, that's for you." And she looked at me and she started crying. And she said, "It's for me?" I said, "Yeah, it's for you." And I explained it, and I gave her a little explanation, and she reached across the table and gave me a big hug. And now, if you look in the old traditional rules of being a priest, priests aren't supposed to let women touch them, but I'm not going to push away a woman who just got out of a female penitentiary for 13 years. So I gave her a hug back. And then it was an awkward departure because all of a sudden she looked at her watch maybe 1 minute later and realized she had to go. And I think she just left her pizza. Maybe she packed it up, and then someone was picking her up and she disappeared. That was it. That's all I saw of her. And I thought maybe that's where I had to face this spiritual attack, was to meet her. I don't know. So then the next day, different part of Texas, I got to once again meet one of my favorite bishops, Bishop Henry Rene Gracita, now 102 years old. And he was awake and alert, knew, as we said in EMS, he was awake and alert to person, place, time, and event, knew where he was, knew his name, everything else. Tiny bit of senility setting in. Looks a lot better than I will at 102 years old, I'm sure. And this was a bishop who was a hero of the pro-life movement. There's a lot of bishops who go to pro-life dinners, but this man was persecuted and suffered a lot for attempting to end abortion. And he also had the same view of the papacy as me the last 13 years. You can go Google his website, which is Deep Calls Upon Deep in Latin, which is Abyssus Abyssum. And he also, I got to know him out at Mel Gibson's chapel, actually. Anyway, what I want to talk about with Bishop Gracita at 102 years old, and again, he's a great hero to me. I read his book. I can't remember the name of it, but I don't read a lot of bishops' books, but I did read his biography. And so when I walked in and saw him again, and again, I've met him in real life, but I told him in the meantime I had read his book, and he looked at me and he said, "Let me shake your hand." And I thought there was some senility or dementia setting in. And as I shook his hand, he goes, "I want to shake the hand of the one person who read my book." So great humility there, great sense of humor. He knew who I was. He said, "Great to see you, Father Nix." And so I sat down, and I was with my friend Joseph, who's actually been his kind of chauffeur for years and is very close to him. Joseph's a 25-year-old young man from Texas. And we got some chance to talk to Bishop Gracita, again, a hero of a bishop who, by the way, has become much more traditional as time went on, offers the Latin Mass, he knows the old sacraments. He was also a tail gunner in World War II. If you think that sounds impossible, just Google his name and see that he truly is 102 years old. He flew over 30 missions, and I said to him, "How did you survive after 30 missions as a tail gunner?" And he said, "Oh, I did get shot down." And at that point, he kind of mumbled something I couldn't exactly hear, but you can read about that in his book. Pretty cool that we have a traditional bishop who flew 30 missions as a tail gunner in World War II. Anyway, I just want to talk about a few things I asked him, because it probably is the last conversation I'll have with him, at least in real life, because I don't come down here to Texas a lot, at least not his part of Texas. And I had to take a couple notes because it's early here. So let me see what I wrote. I said, "What do you want to be remembered for?" And it was an interesting answer because I gave him kind of a multiple choice. He didn't need a multiple choice, but he is 102, so I decided to help a little bit. I said, do you want to be remembered for your pro-life work, for the fact that you were isolated and shunned by so many priests and bishops in the United States for standing for orthodoxy? Do you want to be remembered for the sacraments, for your love of the Latin Mass? I just named all these things. And the answer he ultimately gave me was union with Christ. He said he had lived his priesthood hoping and I think living with Christ in him, and he wanted to be Christ to the world as a priest. Now, we hear a lot of bishops talk like this, but if you read the biography of his life, I think you can really see he lived this in his life. Um, a lot of people talk about the interior life, but you could tell listening to him, he really did mean that the interior life was primary, was central, was before the exterior life. Union with Christ for him was the fount, the source of any of the exterior life that he tried to live. And then the next question I asked him, I said, Bishop, you know, there's a lot we hear in seminary. What does it take to be a good priest? You have to be prayerful. You have to be chaste. You have to love the people. You have to do the sacraments well. And I said, we learned all that in seminary. What did you learn? I said, I'm 47 years old, and I'm not in parish life. I probably won't be in parish life again, but I still want to be a priest. I still want to offer the sacraments. I still want to bring Christ to people's lives as I have been doing. What did you learn, say, after age 50, you didn't know your first 20 years as a priest? What did you learn later in life? And he said to me, there was a point in his life, in his priesthood, where he learned to be attentive to the person in front of him and the Holy Spirit and what the Holy Spirit wanted for each person he was trying to minister to. And he had to become extremely attentive to that person's needs and to the Holy Spirit in that moment so he could be Christ to that person. Now again, I know this sounds like really basic stuff, but to hear it from a 102-year-old who I know to be a hero, who I know to be sincere, there was something about it that was gilded in truth. I know this sounds kind of basic, but hearing him explain it, I knew he lived it. So what he was again explaining was he came to a point where he had to really dig deep into that attentiveness. And he said when he did that, he could abandon himself to divine providence in the circumstances of what was going on in a potential evangelization encounter, or counseling for people for marriages, or someone you meet on the street, or kind of like what I just described with the woman eating the pizza who just done 13 years in the penitentiary. I'm just learning, and I'm not claiming to be another Bishop Gracita, but I did think of that event as I heard him describe that, and I thought, I think that's what he's talking about. Because if I hadn't dug deeper and actually talked to someone next to me, and I don't really like talking to people at airports, especially while I'm eating fried rice, you have to dig deep, and then you're open to divine providence. Because if I had just said, well, I'm going to describe the difference between the traditional Latin Mass and the Novus Ordo to this woman who's just been in the penitentiary for 13 years, okay, fine, that probably wouldn't change her life. If I had gotten into a debate on the Protestant view of once saved, always saved versus Catholic perseverance, or faith debating faith plus good works, I can do these verse wars with open Bibles with anybody on that. But what God needed that woman to experience at that moment was just coming out of prison, that someone loved her with a chaste love, that someone was trying to love her with Christ's love. And so I'm not saying I'm very good at that all the time. I'm working on it. And hearing Bishop Gracita say that he had lived that the last 50 years was not just an indication I'm kind of getting on the right track, but that is the track for evangelization. That most people, before they want to know, the nitty-gritty inside baseball of the church crisis, simply want to know they are loved. I know that sounds a little bit modernist, but I think even our greatest saints who understood that many people went to hell, like St. Francis Xavier, I think he understood people needed to experience Christ's love before they trust you. I don't think that's modernist, And then the only other thing I want to say about what I learned from Bishop Gracita for the last time I saw him, which will probably be the last time I see him before, please God, we make it to heaven, is he said to me, when I realized I was trying to figure everything out, I stopped trying to figure everything out. And this tied back into the attentiveness, to his abandonment to divine providence. When I realized I was trying to figure everything out, I stopped trying to figure everything out. And as I said a little bit earlier, Bishop Gracita is very involved. He has been very involved in the church crisis, of the papacy and everything else. And we didn't speak about the papacy or Trump or politics or anything yesterday, but I did think of his public statements on a lot of things, and I really realized that there's a great mystery of iniquity upon the church right now. And it doesn't mean we be lazy, it doesn't mean we stop talking about everything, but the great mystery means we just have to go forward in begging God for very high levels of faith and hope and charity, preaching Jesus Christ crucified and risen to the world, teaching traditional Catholicism, sticking to the old sacraments like Bishop Graca did, and certainly doing our best to explain the church crisis, but understanding we're probably not going to fix it. That's going to have to be a God fix. God is going to have to fix the church crisis. It's going to have to be divine intervention, which is either going to be miraculous or devastating or both. I don't know. But I loved talking to Bishop Graca because we have the same view of so many things. We differ on a few things. Many friends do differ on a few things. But what a great man, what a great priest, what a great bishop at 102 years old, who's done a lot for our country, a lot for the salvation of souls, especially down here in the Gulf Coast area. So that's a day in the life of Father Dave Nix, monk missionary, diocesan hermit. As my Twitter feed says, bad hermit. A friend sent me a hat that actually literally says bad hermit on it. But pray I can become a better man, a better priest, and thanks for listening. Have a great day. God bless you.